I'm very excited to have a very diverse group of panelists here today, talking from various places, all the way from the Middle East to the Pacific Islands to Australia to America, with a great crew. And we're going to spend some time today talking about not only the industry, but some of the major projects that are being done around the traps here in the region, and then also talk about some of the challenges that we see for some of these projects going forward. And we've actually got some folks that have been through some success stories and some challenging stories. So I think it'll be actually a very interesting panel. And I want to start off with our colleague from Japan, who's actually going to spend some time. One of the things that for many of us, when we look around the region in terms of telecommunications industry, one of the great success stories of the last 25 years has really been the Japanese market. And as many of the markets have gone through very difficult restructuring, the Japanese have really figured out a way, with government working together with industry and really planning the environment extremely well to actually navigate through what essentially were 2 or 3 financial crises in Asia. And there was a very strong capabilities. And if you talk about everything from broadband penetration to networks, probably there's very few examples in the world of a better place where this environment has been successful. Mm-hmm. Love to hear your thoughts.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me here, and it's my pleasure to be here. I'm very honored. And I have been in this position from last July, and I'm spending almost half a year, and I'm covering the 4 major areas. The first one is AI policy, like Hiroshima AI process, promotion of the Hiroshima AI process. The second is digital infrastructure. And the third one is cybersecurity. And the fourth one is information integrity, which is including the dis and the misinformation. So the second topic of the digital infrastructure is including 5G mobile networks like Open RAN and the submarine cables, data centers, and also all photonics networks. Regarding the submarine cables, we are promoting a lot of projects. We have been promoting a lot of projects. And I think there are 4 reasons of the Japan being the hub of the submarine cables in the Pacific area. And first one is a geographic reason. We have an advantage in location in the Pacific region. We are facing the Pacific Ocean in a good position, and which allows a good accessibility from the US. And second reason is technical reason for subsea cables. Distance between US and Southeast Asia and Oceania is a little bit too long, and it's more efficient to connect Southeast Asia and Oceania to US through Japan, not directly. And technically, it is a little bit difficult from the US to reach the Southeast Asia. The third one is economic reason. The US is the largest economy, and Japan used to be the second largest economy. So there's a strong economic connection between these 2 countries. And we have NEC. We have a company called NEC. NEC is one of the 4 major companies worldwide, which can provide turnkey subsea cable solutions, including conception, engineering, manufacturing, construction, and installation, and the repair. So this is the economic reason. The final one is government relation. We are having a good relation with the US government, so we are working on the subsea cable projects with US government. And in addition to these 4 elements, nowadays we are having more important issue regarding the submarine cables. That is the growing importance of security and resilience in submarine cables. The Pacific area is extremely important in the sense of the geopolitics, and digital infrastructure is being critical for national and economic securities. So we have and also we have a tendency. There is a tendency to work with hyperscalers like Google. Google is promoting a Pacific Connect initiative that is very important for us. So all these things are included, and I think Japan has been the very important hub in the Pacific region, and we'd like to continue to be the good hub.
Thank you. And I think, I think it is a story that's very, very powerful, and actually a lesson for all of us in terms of how actually the government works very closely, not only with its own telecommunications infrastructure, but globally. And one of the big projects that actually has come out of I know you're deeply involved with, but so are these two gentlemen to my left here, Ivan and Rory. The Pacific Fiber Project, one of the things that was the highlight of last year's PTC and sort of in our one in Washington. Tell us about this, I think that's really the first time you've had governments, telecommunications companies, hyperscalers, all working together, and then also trying to deal with a bunch of countries that actually are struggling in sort of, actually doing an outreach program to you. So maybe, Ivan, as you think about this project, what's been the great success stories? What's been some of the challenges that you think about it?
Yeah, on both fronts. I mean, look, if we step back and look at it, as we discussed in some of the other topical sessions, it's a great opportunity that the cable's running through our part of the world. For a number of years, many of the Pacific Islands have been crying out for connectivity. Given the economics and the scale of the markets, we're nothing the scale of the other markets. A lot of cable development simply just bypass our parts of the world. We don't even get offered a doorstep onto those facilities. The fact that this is there is a great opportunity, for many of the markets we're in. The reality is, look, it wouldn't have happened if not for the geopolitics of the region that's driven the cable through these parts. But as I say, we kind of have to strike while the iron is hot, right? Some of the governments, for example, Fiji, for example, have recognized we may not all, have the pieces of the puzzle together to say this is how it's going to work and this is how we'll benefit. But they do have a sense that, look, if we get connected, there's opportunities to do things on that cable. So they've gone out of the way to facilitate things. So there's been, generally for Fiji and other markets, you have tax incentives to get people in, the tax breaks, tax holidays. There's geographical, incentives for developing certain parts of the country. So those are good things to make use of. I think they fast-track a lot of the permitting to get that done. So getting the infrastructure there is important. The challenges around the Pacific markets is, for example, for ATH and Telstra in the Pacific, the total markets we serve have a population maybe 10 million, maybe 20 million. We're not exactly sure what the numbers are because the census doesn't actually bear that out. But these are small markets nevertheless. And for a market with a population of, let's say, 3,000, the economics of getting a cable there are really, really difficult. And I can say there's a handful where we both agree that are feasible on a standalone basis. A lot of the markets will have to be supported by other means, and the traditional aid financing mechanisms still have to come on to actually make those work.
Yeah, no, it's challenging. It's one of the first projects, and I mean, you think about it, the Pacific Islands, you've got Africa, you've got parts of Latin America, where there's similar issues, where you have fairly low population density, but you've got the need to get that infrastructure. It's how we get that last billion people on board.
Connected,
Yeah, Rory, you're actually lucky. You've been in this cable business. You actually own a large portion of all of Asia's cables today. So this is kind of a new plank in sort of the Telstra strategy too, right? In terms of doing new kinds of projects, right?
Absolutely, and I think we all sit here today and we look at the attendance even at this conference and the role that hyperscalers play, and it's increasingly important. But we see it as complementary, and I think if we look at some of the Pacific fiber projects, it's been we spent a lot of time working with APT Telecom thinking about how do we solve pieces of it, and it was only when we brought that together with Google that we were able to really piece it together in a meaningful way. I think Ivan's point on the role of government is extremely important. So if we think about the role that Australia and then the US governments play, but they're only solving pieces of it today. There's still a lot of spurs that need to be developed. Getting it to the islands is actually the hard part, not just the branching unit. And then at the same time, we have LEOsats coming in or being able to provide a different cost-based solution. And relative to some of these smaller islands, sometimes, hate to say it, but maybe subsea isn't the best solution. And I think we have to admit that and realize how these technologies work together in a complementary way. I mean, think of Telstra's position and we think about the projects across the Pacific. There's a lot going on in the Trans-Pacific space. it's high demand area, new routes are being developed, and customers' needs are evolving and changing and bifurcating in many ways. And we see the hyperscalers as a great way to partner through how we do that. But to your point, Bill, we will absolutely continue to invest in the intra-Asia place, because that is our sweet spot, that's our home.
Yep.
And talk a little bit more about success later on and why we've been successful in that space.
Yeah, no, we'll get back to sort of pulling on that after we've had a chance to talk a little bit. So I think, obviously the areas that we see kind of the large projects are obviously these submarine cables. And on the other side of it is as we start thinking about artificial intelligence and data centers, I know Justin's been working on a project in what is becoming one of the more important hubs again is Japan in terms of bringing electricity to the, so you think about it, obviously it's a strategic hub for submarine cables. On the flip side, it's also one of the few places that has a lot of power and overhead. And Justin, I know you just announced a project in Japan. And just for those that you don't know, Justin is also one of the few CEOs here that actually ran a Chinese company for many, many years. So a great resource in the region in terms of understanding also the geopolitical situation from first-hand position. So, but Justin, yeah, give us a little snapshot on how you see things developing in Japan and why you picked Japan with this project, and is it becoming the main hub, or is there going to be other places?
No, I mean, it's been a very interesting past few years, especially on the geopolitical front. I mean, as we were just talking about the submarine cable side of it, 4, 5, 8, 10 years ago, it's really just about connectivity. Now you have to add the security aspect to it. As Bill mentioned, I did and I actually still have an operating data center business in China. But, you asked, why are we doing something in Japan? Well, you look at the macro needs around the world, you look at the upcoming AI demand, and just looking at that as a lens, you need to find places where there's enough power to develop the data centers to allow for the training models to happen. We took a pretty good look at Asia, and right now Johor is one of the hot places to go. But right now, from what I'm understanding, is it's more demand than supply on the power side. So it may look good now, it may not look so good in the future. And then you have to take into consideration the stability of where you're placing billions and billions of dollars of data center infrastructure and even more so, hundreds of billions of dollars of compute. And so we're back looking at Japan. And what are we doing in Japan? Well, you've got power issues. Tokyo, Osaka, they're great locations. Fiber-wise are incredible, but the power is very difficult to connect, and it's in limited supply. So again, carrying the thesis forward, we're looking at southern Japan. There is capacity, connectivity is good. There's 2 nuclear power plants, thank you very much. 2/3 sustainable energy. So now you combine all of that on the straight economics and the macro thesis, and then you layer in the geopolitical issues. And quite simply, we are of the opinion that southern Japan and Japan as a whole can play a vital role in developing a stable ecosystem. Adding the submarine cables, the data centers, the chips that are now being made there with TSMC. We're seeing, in the last 30 years I've been in Asia, we're seeing an incredible shift back to Japan. So congratulations, Imagawa-san. This has been all your great work.
Well, it's all good. I think we've had some great success stories. I think one and I love Cengiz, because Cengiz is probably, for those of you who don't know, he's a board member with us in PTC, but also one of the great CEOs of the region, more towards the Middle East and sort of Central Asia. And Cengiz has had the unique opportunity to actually walk into a lot of businesses that weren't necessarily in the best of shape and turn them around. He's probably one of the great turnaround specialists that we come across. And I'll throw it out to Cengiz. I think he walked into probably one of the more difficult places. And the reason I wanted Cengiz to talk about this is because many of these cables that get built, and I was looking the other day at sort of who's actually presented here over the years and the private cable owners that have been here. If you look at, I look at 19, 8 of them actually went into Chapter 11 sometime later in their life, right? And I think one of the challenges is with this infrastructure is, it does go well a lot of the time, but not all the time. So maybe give us some of the lessons learned as you've come into, and just to kind of set things straight, he wasn't the guy that started the company that he was in. He came in at the end. So, but I think it is an interesting thing to really look at.
Good morning, all. Thanks for the warm welcome, Bill. A great intro, right? So as Bill mentioned, right, GBI is one of the very few remaining private cable owners. Fact number one, this business is very CapEx intensive. It's expensive to put a submarine network at the bottom of the ocean. It requires a solid funding regime to get going, and then a solid plan to recoup your investment. So GBI's cable is about 15 years old, just to set the scene, right? And if you look back in those days, the business model was entirely different. Bill, it was mostly building a subsea cable system that connected landing stations to landing stations, right? Ever since then, the customer needs started evolving as the data centers started popping up, right, all over the world. Then the customers started demanding end-to-end connectivity, meaning data center to data center. What this does, essentially, it basically requires a player like GBI, purely a subsea player, to go acquire last miles, right, from different providers, which your off-net portion of the entire circuit that you deliver becomes larger and larger, driving your gross margins lower and lower, right? So immediately you find yourself either you're going to be marginalized by the others, or you're going to stay in the game, be the contracting party to the large players, but at a very much lower gross margin play, right? So this changing business models is a big factor that, if you consider the lifetime of a subsea cable, 25 years or so, 25 plus years, it's super hard to predict that many years ahead. But you got to be able to predict and then build your system that will accommodate the ever-evolving customer needs. So that's number one. Number two, if you, I'm coming from a region that's not short of any conflicts, any issues, yeah. So these things are sort of outside of your control, right? You can't really control if a country is sanctioned, right? So you build a plan based on serving to a few countries, then all of a sudden you find out that they're on the global sanctions list, and then that part of your business is driven down to zero, right? So it makes it even double the challenge, right? To make sure that your coverage, your compliance, and how you handle this business is extremely thought of, right? You got to be very clear about. On one hand, you're dealing with maybe the Chinese. On the other hand, you're dealing with the U.S. government. How do you put these two businesses, completely Chinese walls between them? No pun intended, right? So that's another challenge. And the third one is the technology, right? I mean, we love pushing the boundaries of technology. But again, you look at our cable. Back then, that was the state-of-the-art cable system network. It has 4 fiber pairs, guys. I mean, today we're talking about 24, 48 being a very common number of fiber pairs, right? And when you have 24 fiber pairs, what you could do is you could just, from the get-go, get a couple of anchor clients, sell those fiber pairs off. You reduce the burden of financing your project, right? Before you even lay the cable, you got money coming in. When you have 4 fiber pairs, you didn't have that luxury, right? If you sold them all, then you don't have a business. So evolving technology, pushing the boundaries, it's a great thing. But if you're in the subsea business, you got to be able to really think ahead, as I said, 25 years, 30 years out, and see where this technology may be heading towards and how you're basically positioning yourself 5 to 10 years after you RFS your project. So there's a lot of complexity, but like Bill said, we're proud to be in this business. We're doing okay. It's got its own challenges, whether it's regional, compliance, regulatory, political, technology, commercial. But if you plan in advance well enough and have a sort of a feel for the industry where it may be heading towards in the next decade or two, I think you'll be in a good shape. But one other thing is that you have to have financial backers that will stick with you. I think that's important, right? If they pull the plug on you, there's nothing you can do. But if they stick with you, it goes around.
Well, I think it begs the question, do you think, I mean, I know you guys are sort of involved in this, but will there be cable projects ever again built that are completely independent of the hyperscalers? Or is it only a hyperscale model that works, where you've got to have them as an anchor tenant and taking up the majority of the capacity to actually fund a cable? I mean, what do you think, Rory? Is it?
Yeah, it's super interesting. Thanks, Bill. And I mean, I think if we step back a little bit and we look at the amount of money that hyperscalers have been putting into cable systems across the world, if you go back 25 years ago in comparative dollars, it's about $11 billion, 24 to 27, that's being invested by the hyperscalers. It's only a quarter of what was built in 99, 2000, 2001. So let's put it into context a little bit. We do feel that wave right now, absolutely. But again, from a hyperscaler's perspective, it's less than 5% of their total capex that they're investing into infrastructure more broadly. And so I think for them, the risk of, and I think they've said this, the risk of underinvesting is greater than the risk of overinvesting.
Yeah.
So I think we have to figure out the way that we partner. Will there be pure consortiums? There will be pockets of it in ways, but I think it's a different world. It's a different model now. Their appetites for return of their own internal demand. They don't have to build a book of business to get this point. We don't have to, as telcos, we have to go out and find a book of business and build our confidence level about to be able to how much we sell up front, how much we're going to sell over time, and go get the investment case. It's a different process, right? Yeah. But I do think that at the same time, there will be some consolidation in terms of the operators that are playing in that space. A lot of operators have a large sucking sound in their P&L or their balance sheet, which is data centers. Yeah. And those go into, as Jeremy well knows, these go into sort of, an extra comma in the numbers in terms of what's required to invest there. Yeah. So I think there will be a smaller number of operators that want to continue to play, because I think scale is key in this. And that's not just in the investment, it's in the operations. It's in the landing stations. It's in all the expertise that as operators we bring to the industry in a way. And I think that's one of the things that Telstra is really proud of, is the scale that we have gives us the ability to compete in a different way. We're not just buying segment to segment, CLS to CLS. We are operating a network. It provides resilience. And the more that you bring AI into that, you can start to dynamically manage traffic across that. So I absolutely see a role for operators still in the ecosystem. Do I think it's going to be pure play operator consortium led? Consortiums are complicated. Nobody really wants a consortium. We end up there out of necessity. Yeah. And so I think, the consortiums won't be 15 operators. There may be a small number of players coming together because they're easier to manage.
Yeah. And it's interesting. One of the other things I would say is, this new model that's evolving with the hyperscalers. I was on a podcast last week with the former CEO of Zayo, and he was talking about the fact that if you think about how the internet evolved over the last 15 years, it actually evolved on the back of assets that were reset. So if you look at most of the United States, all of the fiber assets were written down by 80 to 90%. If you look across the globe, almost 50% of the assets were written down. So if you think about Google, Facebook, all these companies, they basically wrote on
someone else's money.
Was repriced, right?
Yeah.
So this is the first time they're actually paying full price, right? And so it's an interesting model, whether it will work or whether it's the new model, right? Yeah. Ivan, what do you think? Because I think one of the challenges is also, as those of us that are from the telco environment, we are focused not only on trying to service, the big customers, but we're also trying to figure out how do we get, our networks out to as many people as possible. Yeah. And this new model makes it really hard, I think, a little bit, because there's not the participation of everybody. It's really just one key player, and their interests are really data center to data center type traffic versus focusing on the end consumer, right?
Yeah, look, the hyperscalers, as already said, they will connect the larger markets of their interest. Some of our markets fall along that way, so they sell the excess capacity there. That makes sense. Yeah. But when the project's over, you come back and take a look. We see in some of our markets, there's still going to be a need for connectivity. Some of them may miss out, and the big players probably won't touch those. Yeah. So there's a need for, these are smaller systems, of course, at the end of the day, but someone's going to have to build them out as well. So they probably won't involve hyperscalers, much smaller scale, more point-to-point direct type connectivity. So some of that will go on, but it's, I guess across the whole portfolio of fiber projects you look at, this would be very small, but for our part of the world, it's equally important, if not more important.
It's very, very important. And just to get it, one of the things that Rory brought up there, which I think is really important, what's the role of satellite? Because the interesting thing is, geo satellites now,
Yeah.
you know, on a price per megabyte, are probably getting pretty close to what you can actually buy fiber generated access to the internet.
Look, for a lot of markets, it's quick. It's a quick and easy solution. The price point, I think, is very competitive right now. But look, as I said previously, you know, the Pacific Islands, we are people as well. You know, we have the same hopes, aspirations, you know, as everyone else. So we don't want to be too far adrift of the first world. So while satellite provides good connectivity, gets people online and able to do things, ultimately no country wants to be, you know, disconnected either through a disaster or something and not have reliable connectivity. For a lot of what needs to be done on the business, the enterprise, the government front, cable connectivity is still, you know, of paramount importance. So we still need to do that at some stage. For many markets to sort of get up there quickly, and that satellite's the go-to, but ultimately, politically, I can guarantee every market, every country wants fiber connectivity.
Yeah, no, I think it's, even though satellite may be helpful at 1 to 10 megabytes, it doesn't really help when you get to the gigabits, right? I mean, it's sort of, I think one of the interesting things, though, is as we start thinking about the region, right? It's, and how we build infrastructure. How do we deal with, you know, there's a lot of geopolitical issues right now. And for those of us that have been in the cable industry, remember Fukushima, remember the Taiwan earthquakes, all these big, massive situations where, you know, Americans, Chinese, Japanese, Taiwanese, all had to work together because there was a crisis, right? Now we've sort of got this world where you can't build a cable into China or Hong Kong right now. No one's allowing that. The Chinese can't build a cable to America. And you actually have, there's been a kind of a geopolitical break. How do we, you know, this is such an intense, you know, industry, and you start thinking about putting artificial intelligence where you're now going to have, you know, data centers that drive, you know, entire economies connected, and you have one disaster. Like no one thought Fukushima would ever happen, right? And see, it's something that comes out of the blue. You know, Taiwan was crazy that in 06. I mean, how do we bridge this as we start thinking about the infrastructure going forward and these big projects? What are the things that we can do to as an industry to help?
Well, let me make a comment. Let me talk about our experience in of the disaster in Japan. We had a very big earthquake last year in January in the place called Ishikawa Prefecture. Yeah. And at that time, I was responsible for the telecommunication network. Because the existing telecommunication network was heavily damaged, and Starlink was very useful. Yeah. All of the people, all the residents are depending on the Starlink, and it was very useful. And it was provided by the telecom operators or government, so they didn't have to pay. So I think at this point, the 99% of the data traffic between the continents are occupied by the submarine cables. So only 1% is the satellite, but we are promoting the research and development towards 6G. We call it beyond 5G, and the major issue of the 6G is the non-terrestrial network. So satellite network is going to be a very good broadband network, and also some of the Japanese companies working on the satellite network called HAPS, High Altitude Platform System. So I don't think it's going to change in a few years, but in 5 years, satellite network could be a very good option for all the people. So in 5 years, the balance between the submarine cable and satellite network would be a very big issue for the telecommunications carriers, I think.
I'll give you an example, Bill. I mean, importance of satellite players are going to continue to increase. I mean, a couple of years ago, Qatar hosted the World Cup, right? Yeah. A world event that billions of people really put their eyes on, and you can't really mess up or you can't screw up in a World Cup event. So we delivered the connectivity for most of this, and satellite was part of our strategy. It was quadruple redundancy to have these television networks stream the games live. And satellite played a great, important role in this. And I do believe that they're going to continue to increase to become a solid resiliency play for subsea. And just, I think a month ago or so, there was an announcement by NATO, right? They funded a program where formally satellites are positioned to be a backup player for subsea cables when there's multiple subsea cuts that we often see more and more nowadays. So they're gonna be a part of this game moving forward, a strong part.
Yeah, no, I think. But the question I have for you though is, obviously you can't back up a cable with a satellite. Let's be honest. I mean, you can. It's a last mile solution, right? It solves a lot of Ivan's issues of getting to the end users and across islands. But you're never going to solve multiple terabytes with a satellite, right? I mean, even thinking out 10 years from now, it's. I don't think it isn't a resilient solution, and so there has to be a lot more, I think, big player collaboration to actually make these big disasters to help fix them, right?
I think it's all about diversity. And I think, as we talk to customers and partners, there's a question about diversity in every piece of the network. It's on the long haul, it's on the short haul, it's on the front haul, it's on the back haul, it's on the cable landing station, it's on the data center. And I think as we think about AI and we get to autonomous networks, the ability for networks to be able to self-heal and self-manage based off of incidents or disruptions in the network, and being able to have that mesh type network, not just on the underlay or the local network, but actually on the backhaul network is going to be increasingly important. We talk about Japan, it's incredibly important. We look at Australia and we look at how, because of all of the politics that are playing out, how we see Australia getting closer to Asia. And as we think about the topology of the network growing and developing about where data centers are placed, it's not just where a data center is placed, it's where a training module is placed. What does data sovereignty look like? How are countries going to look at where the training modules can sit, and willing to trade off latency in training modules for cost of reliable green power? Whereas inference models, you still have to have ultra low latency effectively. And so I think that topology of the network is changing, but through that, we can't think about one hub, two hubs. This has to be a highly diverse network with lots of sources of data centers, lots of sources of connectivity. So as these data centers are being built, I think it's incumbent on all of us of how do we continue to provide that connectivity to be able to basically create this mesh kind of network on the backhaul network. Well, not just point to point, it's how do you get three connections between point to point? And then how are you landing in 2 or 3 different landing stations in a country rather than one landing station? It's not about getting to a country, it's about which side of the country and how diverse is it from your other landings. So I think that's where that breadth of development needs to come, and it's not going to come through one system or one silver bullet through the system. It's going to be about how do we bring that sort of physical infrastructure, but then how do we layer on top of that the autonomous network to be able to manage this, and how are we doing it on a sort of integrated way across the system?
Well, and as you bring that up, I mean, taking it back again to Japan and the idea that there's a Tokyo hub and there's an Osaka hub. Going back to the geopolitical and now the submarine cable side of it, from Japan, from Tokyo down to Osaka, down to Kyushu, there's a tiny hop that goes into Busan. They're hardening that hop right now and increasing the fiber, the cables, the submarine cables that go from Kyushu into Busan to allow a direct line from Tokyo, Osaka, Busan, Kyushu into Busan, hardening that so that you can actually build that redundancy in the network. So if you're coming from the West Coast through Tokyo, you can shoot down to all the way down to Southeast Asia that way as redundancy. And then to your point on data centers, which I know a little bit about, we look at Kyushu potentially as a new hub, but at the same time, building in Kyushu allows data compute from Tokyo and Osaka that is less latency required to get dumped into Kyushu as a starting point. You're freeing up assets within Tokyo and Osaka for more latency-driven applications. Again, we're getting back to AI, the idea of self-driving cars. Well, you're not running a self-driving car AI model or a system from Kyushu for cars in Tokyo, but you can develop the core inferences and the core model within Kyushu. You can run Kyushu self-driving cars in Kyushu, but for Tokyo, you're freeing up space from Tokyo data centers. So I fully believe this whole concept of it's an ecosystem, really. And to your point about sort of the geopolitics, I remember a time where, yes, we could work with China. We could work with Japan, and relationships were getting better. And I was in China when the shark ate the cable, and this is 25 years ago. and China was cut off from the world's internet. I mean, this is such a long time ago. They actually did take all of China's traffic and throw it up to the satellites. It was a horrible solution. So we're in a much better, a more integrated world right now. It is unfortunate we're bifurcating that. We're kind of separating from what has been built, but the core infrastructure is still going to find a way.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, but I actually think it's interesting because I think we sit at an interesting place. We haven't had a disaster in the New World. And depending on the location, you know, I mean, the Luzon Strait was a place that, you know, if you had a problem, China, Japan, everyone had to work together to reformat the network.
Not anymore.
Right, which is sort of a, and I think people sort of are a false sense of comfort at sometimes that it's going to be easy if things go wrong. And we've been very, very fortunate so far. Let's talk about, the interesting thing is we think about infrastructure projects, and it is becoming, you know, you look at these new training models, you know, and I'll throw out some numbers that we've seen in Europe. Typically, if you're doing between 200 megawatts to a gigawatt of power, they're requiring anywhere from 25 to 40 fiber pairs that run 20 terabits on it to basically move that model. And you start putting those numbers together, and then you say, okay, well, yeah, we've got resilient networks. Well, we don't have resilient networks for that, right? And so if you had another Fukushima in Japan, when you have this training model sitting there with the 40 fiber pairs, what do you do? Because right now there is no way to back it up, to be honest with you. I mean, we're heading to a place where, you know, these are going to be standalone sort of assets around the world. And, you know, as we start to think about it, we actually have to start thinking about a new way of building networks, because reality is we don't have resilience. We don't have that much. You were talking about more overhead than we have in all the networks combined for one data center. I mean, that's you start thinking about how do we solve this? It's going to be very interesting.
The DC to DC is incredibly important. I mean, if I look again, I'll go back to Australia as an example. We know a little bit about it in Telstra, but you know, we're building a US $1 billion upgrade of our intercapital intercity fiber network. So this is 25-year-old technology that has been there, and we're deploying basically high fiber counts between all of the capital cities exactly for that reason. Is this something that's going to be monetized over the next 2 years? No, absolutely not. But is this building for the future in Australia to be able to provide that resilience and diversity? So as data centers go into, you know, near Darwin or near Perth and taking advantage of solar in different areas, and then they want to connect back to Melbourne and Sydney, we have that fiber connectivity to be able to provide that diversity? Absolutely. And we made a big bet around it. So I think it's, to the point, it's a little bit of everything. It's satellite, it's subsea, it's modern terrestrial fiber, it's, you know, upgrading our cable landing stations. It's every component of the network.
Well, and to some degree, it's still also chicken and egg. You know, if we're running, and I don't know of many 1 gigawatt, single gigawatt language models that are being trained today.
No,
we're going in that direction.
I say there's a lot on the drawing board.
Exactly.
There's not a lot of them that are, in fact, to my knowledge, I think there's 1 or 2 in the United States. And there's 1 in Europe, but that's about it.
That's it. And so we have to build up towards that. And you know, a data center plan is 18, 24 months. You know, bringing fiber, again, within Japan, you know, there's fiber routes that are actually available that can be expanded, you know, because of the railway system, the high-speed rail, you know, the fiber is running right through that. So it really comes into this sort of conversation across all the key players and aligning them. So you brought up earlier this idea of a consortium, or the Googles and the hyperscalers, to establish a new hub anywhere in the world. You need your first tenant to come in. Once that first tenant proves that the model actually works, then it's a follow-on, and then you're starting to bring all the other additional infrastructure to that. So it's something that we have to keep a conversation open on. You know, it just has to be open. What are we doing? What is Telstra doing? What is Google looking at? You know, conferences like this help us get there.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Bill, I think the point is that we had the flap for the longest years, right? The 4 cities that have become the heart of the data center ecosystem. I believe moving forward, we're not going to have super large data center hubs. It's going to be smaller hubs dispersed around the world, right? And it's not just the connectivity that will drive the choice of that locations, right? It's the power availability too. So, you know, 5 years ago, if you asked anybody whether they would put a data center in the Middle East or not, they would say, are you crazy, right? Because immediate thinking is that super hot environment, why would I put a data center there? But if you drill down to the problem, two of the biggest issues, you can address them. One, connectivity. There's plenty of submarine cables and terrestrial cables coming in and out. Two, the power, right? I mean, when you're sitting on the world's largest natural gas reserves, and you got plenty of sun that can give you solar power at a very, very competitive rate, then you're thinking again, hey, rather than the Nordics, which used to be the natural choice of putting a data center, you could put it in Doha, where temperatures are consistently above 100 Fahrenheit. But if you do the math, hey, it's you come off better off, right? Even despite the heat, cooling it at a cheaper rate, having the connectivity option. So we're going to be seeing a bunch of unexpected regions come out and become really these data center hubs.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of interesting because you think about also these models are also movable. So the reality is also the interesting thing about training models is they can be in one place for some time and they can go somewhere else. Similar, if you think about the internet today, largely, as you said, there's four main locations, and that's because it's chasing content into those locations. It's Amsterdam, it's San Jose or whatever, and so you essentially have got these main hubs. But we're going to have, and it's interesting because I think the way networks are going to go, we're going to have new temporary hubs where you're building training models where they may chase power, they may look for data sovereignty issues or regulatory environment, and then they're going to build this thing, and then it could stay there or it could go somewhere else. And it's also that, which is going to make it even more interesting, but also more challenging. You think about, because you have to build the fiber to get there, you have to build the data center to get there, and it may not be there forever, which is sort of an interesting dynamic that I think we haven't all started to think about yet, but we will have to think about as the months come ahead. I think what I'd like to do is, if there are questions from the audience, I'd be happy to field a few with 5 or 6 minutes here left. And if there are not, we will continue with the Q&A here at the panel. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, hard to see.
Yes, sir.
There's one there.
I guess we're missing our microphone. JC, can you come with our microphone, please? Here we go. But go ahead. Try and use a very loud voice, and I'll repeat it for you.
So, thank you very much for your nice presentation. And I have one question. Bill, yesterday you talked that in the olden days, 90% of the participants came from the telecommunication sector. And now, the 50% come from the data center section. Maybe next year, 30% will come from AI. So in the olden days, we all have the very good connection, very good friendly connection with the telecommunications sector manufacturers. And nowadays, as you have mentioned, the hyperscalers are the main players to install the submarine cables and the data center. So just a little bit our communication tools between for example, this Imagawa regulators and telecommunication players are a little bit changed. So it is very important for us to how to communicate with the hyperscalers. That is very important. So maybe, for example, all of you can talk to the president of, for example, LTT, of course, CEO of Terrestrial, but not many of them can talk to the top management hyperscaler. Maybe President Trump can do it, but it's only exception. So my question is how you can talk with the hyperscalers and communication with hyperscalers getting better and how you manage to do it. Thank you.
Excellent question. I think the great news is forums like this are very good. And many of the hyperscalers come here. I think, and to be honest, I look at the hyperscalers and I would say 90% of the people came from the telcos. So so you might say that although it's 50% of the people are not from the telcos anymore, they were from the telcos and now they're at these locations. So I think the thing I would say is that keep those relationships alive, and reality is the person next to you might end up being in a hyperscale tomorrow. And but I think the point is, I think these are people that are trying to do what they can. It's similar to what AT&T or a Telstra or a KDDI tried to do 10 years ago. They happen to be the big customers. They may not be the big customers 10 years from now, but I think you have to listen to them. You have to work with them, and I think I encourage people to come to forums like this where you can engage. And I think that's the only way to make it work.
So, couple on. I mean, I think I love that because we get to work with the hyperscalers, right? And I think hyperscalers aren't one entity. They're all a little bit different. Their needs are different. And I think there was a period of time when a lot of the tech companies were investing directly and saying telcos are too slow. And I think that's come around a little bit. And I think it's come around because we've sped up, but also through that we've been able to demonstrate what role we play, what value we can create. And I think in any customer or partner relationship, you just have to be able to demonstrate your value, your differentiation, what you bring to the discussion. If it's just, this used to be our market, we should be here, you will be out the door faster than you know what happens, right? So you have to be able to represent and show up and say, I have something to add to the conversation. I have something to add to the project, to the investment, to the end customer use case, whatever that might be. And so I think to the question, how do we open the channels of communication? We have to be differentiated. We have to be relevant, and we have to engage with partners and customers as partners and customers. And we have to listen to what their needs and not think about what are you asking for, but what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and how do I help you solve that problem?
Well, and you brought up something earlier that they're constantly underestimating what the needs are. One thing that's always been within this industry is there's estimates of what is needed, and then you're playing catch up with the hyperscalers. So I totally agree with that concept of this is a great forum for it. These are great partners to be working with. Today they could be working at Telco, tomorrow they could be working at Google. But there's a differentiating aspect, and when you're working with potential partners or customers who are always playing catch up, they really don't have time to look ahead. And so they look towards you when that opportunity comes to say, oh, I've got a problem, you've got a solution. And within forums like this, we can help get that message out.
And
also, if you have an, sorry.
It's walking into the discussions with an open mind. So, when Google were coming through, they weren't even looking at stopping in Fiji and French Polynesia. But somehow they had a look at it, and for them, they worked out that we get a big break in the cost of energy by stopping at these locations. So they had a benefit they wanted. We looked at it not purely from a monetary perspective. We said, well, what can Google bring to the table? They said, look, we're building data centers. We don't have a lot in that space. So one of the things the discussion with Google is now, can we collaborate on this? And also do some knowledge transfer, because for us in our part of the world, it's also about upskilling our people, giving them job opportunities and things like that. And that's what they bring to the table, apart from the monetary, sort of benefits to that. So it kind of makes it work, but you have to be open to discuss these things rather than limit to, what should you pay me, or what do I want out of it, or is this my space and you get out, because that would be counterproductive.
You were saying something.
I was saying, hyperscalers are also getting quite experienced in this, right? Either by transferring people from the industry or building their knowledge, right? So if you have something that's compelling, relevant to what they need, even if you don't have to get in touch with them, they will come and find you.
Sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good comment?
Sure.
As a government, we have been closely communicating with hyperscalers these days, like Google. And these days, hyperscalers has a very big vision, including of course, our government, and also US government, Australian government, and the Pacific Island government. They have a big vision. And to us, it seems to me that the hyperscalers are promoting these kind of projects, not only for profit, but they are also considering the national security or geopolitics. Now at this point, it's very good for the government to work with the hyperscalers. And they are also including lots of the governments and also public sectors. So it's very efficient. So I don't know how long it's going to be last, but for coming few years or so, it's very good for us to work with the hyperscalers.
Yeah, I agree. Well, unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I would just like to say very quickly, thank you very much to our distinguished panelists. You were terrific today.
Thank
and from
you.
a very diverse background. So it's been a fantastic few minutes with you. So thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Bill.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.